Cyberpunk. The term was first used to describe a new genre in science fiction literature. Cyberpunk. It was inaugurated with the publication of William Gibson's Neuromancer, winner of the Hugo, Nebula, Locus, and Philip K. Dick Awards. Gibson's books, Burning Chrome, Neuromancer, Count Zero, and Mona Lisa Overdrive, have been translated into every language conceivable, and thousands of copies are sold daily around the world. The success of these books has generated spin-offs such as a graphic novel and a computer role-playing game. Neuromancer's protagonist, Case, is a streetwise young man living at the periphery of a not unfamiliar high-tech society and its laws. Familiar? Yet a society with imploded cities, mutant subcultures, and artificial realities.
The sky above the port was the color of television tuned to a dead channel. Night City was like a deranged experiment in social Darwinism designed by a bored researcher who kept one thumb permanently on the fast-forward button.
You could say that cyberpunk is postmodern science fiction. It's a lot more postmodern than the old science fiction was. But science fiction is a very, I'm speaking of the American science fiction industry. And it's been traditionally a fairly reactionary literary form, a form in which you weren't encouraged to develop as a stylist or to investigate any of the things that were happening in the world of literature. And one of the things that the so-called cyberpunk writers have done, either consciously or unconsciously, is to look around the world outside, look at the fine arts as well, and import whatever they could use into to the sort of literary ghetto of science fiction. In New York publishing, they call science fiction the golden ghetto, because it's this sort of schlock area that makes the most money.
Nowhere in his books do we find traditional government. Real power is in the hands of the Zaibatsus, the multinationals.
The Zaibatsus, the multinationals that shaped the course of human history, had transcended old barriers. Hives with cybernetic memories, vast single organisms, their DNA coded in silicon. Kingpins in a given industry would be both more and less than people. A gradual and willing accommodation of the machine, the system, the parent organism.
I think we're moving toward a world where all the consumers under a certain age would probably tend to identify more with their consumer status or with the products they consume than they would with any sort of antiquated notion of nationality. We're increasingly sort of interchangeable.
When William Gibson's visions were published, they struck sparks in the real world. Scientists and hackers had found a future they couldn't wait to build, couldn't wait to live in, couldn't wait to sell. William Gibson, godfather of cyberpunk, found himself in a situation where he was actually programming the future. Never before had science fiction literature determined the way people thought and spoke about new technology. This synthesis of fiction and fact proved to be of value to each. And now, cyberpunk is a movement, looking set to blast toward the millennium.
At a certain point, I saw cyberpunk jump from being a literary description to being a description of something in the real world. I think the New York Times used it in a headline last year, "Cyberpunks do something," and I said, "What?" And I thought they were referring to this group of writers I'm associated with, but in fact they were referring to outlaw hackers who had broken into someone's data bank. And either, I believe Time magazine used it as well in that sense. So which is an interesting thing to see. I was happy to see it take on this new life in the world outside, because then I felt I wouldn't be quite so saddled with it.
Gibson's image of computer cowboys hacking a perilous post-humanist lifestyle on a new technological frontier gave hackers and technophiles an identity and a set of ennobling myths. After reading Neuromancer, hackers started to realize that they were in fact, and probably had always been, cyberpunks.
The sky above the porch is the color of television, tuned to a dead channel. It's not like I'm using, Case heard someone say, as he shouldered his way through the crowd around the door of the chat. It's like my body's developed this massive drug deficiency. It was a sprawl voice and a sprawl joke. The Chatsubo was a bar for professional expatriates. You could drink there for a week and never hear 2 words in Japanese. Rats was tending bar, his prosthetic arm jerking monotonously as he filled a tray of glasses with draft Keurig. Case found a place at the bar between the unlikely tan on one of Lonnie Zone's whores and the crisp naval uniform of a tall African whose cheekbones were ridged with tribal scars.
William Gibson's novel Neuromancer it's a paradox, because when one reads its words, one finds a very, very dark, dismal world. However, when one reads between the lines, it's a panacea, it's a cure-all. And just like Ashley and I have found, one can definitely find his own very personal rainbow.
This is the most interesting, exciting book I've read in years. Not only is it a literary masterpiece, but it's a new genre of science fiction that's not way into the future of Star Wars and Obi-Wan Kenobi and forces. It's the way the world is going to be in 10 years, like it or not, and it's preparing us for that. It's nitty-gritty, it's street smarts, it's a magnificent new work, and the book Neuromancer, it does have a magic.
To my mind, at least, is really the world that we live in. It's sort of just pushed a little bit.
It's science fiction, but it's here and now nitty-gritty science fiction, which is, I think, the genre of the future.
You're starting to see pop influences feeding back into science fiction, which has traditionally been this strange kind of isolated little culture.
It's almost like Neuromancer is all magic and 21st century synchronicity.
In a way, there's a big retreat from high tech, and I think in terms of style and design and so on, and I think that this has to be an organic type of movie and not something about things or something about technology.
Earl McRausch is an ideal candidate to do the script.
I like movies with a lot of edge.
The most difficult concept in this movie is the notion of cyberspace, and it's something that makes this book unique.
I just think it's wonderful. I mean, it's been very exciting in the office. When the Cabana Boys took the full-page ad in Variety, I mean, the Variety doesn't come into the science fiction department, obviously. It comes into, we have a person who's responsible for movie tie-ins, and people were sort of running through the halls saying, look at this, look at this. It just was so great. I mean, what they've done for Neuromancer as a movie property is obviously reflected back well on the book.
They seem to have a really fine touch for design.
The feeling is excitement that something is going to be taken and turned into a big success. I mean, it starts out as potential, and you hope that things develop and work towards a successful conclusion. And I've been very impressed with the way Cabana Boys has handled it, and I'm not at all surprised that it's going well.
Many of the most interesting movies that have been made in the science fiction area in the last decade have been made by independent producers.
We see the film Neuromancer as a tool, a mechanism almost, to bridge the very real, very waking, conscious environment that we live in to a very subconscious or metaphysical world that we can be aware of, and the computer being the bridge between the two. And we see Neuromancer, the film, as a very hands-on approach conceptually to filmmaking and also to marketing and development of ideas and development of enthusiasm of people involved in the project directly and people who will be going to the theaters to see it. It's a completely interactive concept behind the film, and we hope to involve as many people as possible on as many different levels as possible, and we're looking for the hit of 1988 in Neuromancer.
If I were laying odds, if you offered me 10 top movie properties and say which one is going to be a big hit, I'd put my money on Neuromancer and give that a boy adventure.